You're tuned in to RX Radio.
The worst part that I hate about doing like recorded stuff is I hate listening to myself when I read off a script, because like I just have the worst fucking script reading voice.
Well, there's no script here on RX Radio. We just talk out of
Not
our
yet.
ass and then deal with it later.
No, it's for real though. Like, have you ever listened to a podcast before that was about a subject that you really liked and were interested in, and the person who was narrating the podcast was just terrible at it? Or like an audiobook, right? Like the narrator's voice was just like annoying. It's like the George risk management book from Seinfeld. Like, I don't want to listen to somebody who sounds like me, right? Like, I sound terrible. I definitely never want to listen to me.
Yeah, I've have my voice recorded in so many ways and so many different means that I've heard over the years that I just cannot stand to listen to a second of the podcast anymore.
I don't blame you. The first time I came on RX'D Radio, my parents asked me to send them a link to the podcast, and that still hasn't been done. I don't believe it's gonna happen.
No. My dad found it one day and he listened to it and he's like, you curse a lot on your podcast. I've had like multiple people, like that's their takeaway. And now like when people tell me that they listen to the podcast, the first thing I say is, I'm sorry, but what did you think? Apologize first and then get opinions later.
Yeah, it's always easier to beg for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. No, I agree with that 100%. Like, so parallel to this, like I've been doing a bunch of work on the collective, on the Discord bot that we have in there. And when I was setting that up, I was really frustrated. I should rephrase. I was really fucking frustrated.
Fuck yeah.
And I named it Fuck Shit Turd.
Nice.
And like, I thought it was a private ID, and it never came up. So I was going through like developing the new onboarding workflow, and I have this thing come up, and it's like, type in your email address here, and then there's a little warning under it that says you're sending your info to Fuck Shit Turd.
Yeah, this isn't a scam. Wait, I gave these guys my credit card information.
Yeah, it's like that. It's a real reputable business there. Fuck Shit Turd.
That's so on brand. So on brand. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the voice that you're hearing right now is Matthew Penney, our CTO here at Prescript. You've been on once before. You've been on a handful of times, right? When we were in Florida.
I've been on a few times.
Yeah, we've been on a few times. So he's the one in charge of making this machine run, and kind of just cleaning up Shallow and my mess on a weekly basis. That's Matt's job description.
I hate internet memes and love internet memes. Hate them mostly, love them sometimes. Yeah. My life is kind of like the one of Charlie Day standing in front of the board with Pepe Silva from that, like the second season of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's like it all goes back to Pepe Silva, right? Like everything in this business goes back to Pepe Silva. It's always been a fun time being on here, man. It's, you and I have had been through the gamut, and you and I and Shallow have been through the gamut and all sorts of stuff. But you and I have been through a particularly common gamut, I believe.
Yeah, such a good segue, reeling it in. As always, as you always
Look
do.
At this. Like, I can do this podcasting thing. I just need to gain like 300 pounds and never shave again.
Yeah, there we go. You'll fit right in.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good way to kind of segue into something of actual value, is that you and myself, we both we did our stint in CrossFit, right?
Yes.
Which I just learned like 8 minutes ago, you were doing CrossFit pre-pandemic as you got into the level 1 course before you were actually part of the company as our CTO. So I guess my question for you is, what was your experience in getting into CrossFit in terms of what was your education level around exercise in general? What did you gain from CrossFit? And then how did that mix with the education you were gaining as you went through the level 1? And before you answer that, I want to preface this to everyone that's listening, that you're the only person that I know that is willing to learn another language for fun. I
Fun.
Anytime we have a challenge or a bottleneck or a roadblock in this business, Matt is willing to go out on his own volition and learn everything that he can to fix the problem, even if it's pursuing another degree. I think at one point you were going to get an MBA just to sort out some of our business admin issues. So that's the type of person that Matt is. So now that we've prefaced that for everyone, back to the question is kind of what was your experience in starting with CrossFit with maybe not too much education or background in the principles that actually make exercise work? And then as you started to learn some of these things, how did that evolve your thought process?
Right. Okay. So here's an explanation of why I need to learn everything about everything that I'm doing is,
Yes.
well, it's 4 letters. It's ADHD. And it's awesome. Oh, wait, actually, it's not awesome. It fucking sucks. I don't recommend it. However, that I wanted to mention that because I'm just about to jump on a tangent, and this is a thing that I do. And I hate doing it, but I feel like it's important to answer the question. And I hope it
But I love being here for
stupid. So I say in the beginning. However, I'm gonna pick this up probably 3 or 4 years into training. Up until that point in time, I started lifting weights in 2009 after I graduated university. I was always a skinny kid, right? So skinny, then fat, then skinny, and a little all over the map. I just wanted to do something athletic,
Yeah.
air quotes athletic, as far as doing a back squat and a curl could possibly be considered athletic. But yeah, in 2013, or 2012 to 2014, I played rugby. So I never played a contact sport before, so that was kind of a dumb decision on my behalf.
Dove right in.
But I did stick with it for 3 years, which meant that I had to learn how to not be ragdolled around the field, because when you're 6'3" and 185 pounds, you get ragdolled quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, well, we're going to start with the educational journey was one of more rooted in self-preservation than anything else.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I read, all of the internet's favorite fitness material. Not naming authors in particular, but the ones that advise that you drink a gallon of milk a day are amongst them. And I sort of trained like that for a while, sort of thinking that was the way, so to speak. And I mean, to an extent, it actually worked really, really well. I mean, between 2013 and 2014, in that off season, I put on some 45 pounds, which was
that's no joke.
I mean, let's not sit here and pretend that those were 45 clean pounds. Like, I mean,
right. It can't be at that point. I don't.
The predictable outcome.
Trend, is that how people do that? They put on muscle. I don't think it was that though. It was just milk.
Oh God, I couldn't even do it then. And I did buy whole milk for the record. I just never got a gallon of it at once because that's gross, dude.
Yeah.
No thanks. So I trained with that over that off season. Did the squat, bench, deadlift, pull up thing, 4 whole exercises. Tried to clean a bit. But I actually ended up picking up a book during that period of time. I think it's The Science and Principles of Strength Training. I can't remember. It's something that came out of the Eastern Bloc. I mean, I don't know if it was originally written before the Iron Curtain fell, or if this is more of a recent thing, but it was a very, very scientific literature. And let me tell you, the fact that the Toronto Public Library had it in I was able to borrow it from the public library was actually kind of insane.
That's amazing.
Right? Like, I mean, I consider it to be like academic literature first and foremost is already kind of offbeat. And in 2013, fitness literature was also very offbeat. I mean, it was starting to get really, really popular vis-a-vis CrossFit, right? We'll get into that. Right. I read through that. I actually found myself very much enjoying it. But it was very much academic and very difficult to apply. So it was all just like concepts that were sort of like circulating in my head, right? So after I retired from rugby, from getting my head knocked around a little bit too much, I was kind of in this weird like in-between zone, which sort of led into CrossFit. So now I guess now that I've spent 5 minutes giving you that nonsense tangent, setting the stage for my great arrival, to be really bad at something. That would have been at the beginning of 2017. So I came in, I was getting a little bit towards the end of 2016, I was starting to get pretty bored of just coming in and like thinking in my head, like this like squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, pull up, power clean type of training was like, this ain't it, man. I mean, I'm not going to shit on it. It's good for what it needs to do for people who just don't have a ton of time and need to put on, need to add strength, but it wasn't, after you do it for long enough, you just get nervous. And I don't want to be nervous in front of workouts. Like I'm going to be pooping in front of every leg day that I do for the rest of my life, thanks to this. And I did today, like I squatted today. I couldn't start squatting until I pooped first, right?
Well, that's a good protocol. Just, making sure that everything goes according to plan.
Oh, but it's what they say is better in the toilet than on the platform.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
But yeah, so I got to the end of that and sort of like feeling like these workouts were very much dragging on. I wasn't really making a ton of progress, and it's kind of like lifting heavy weight for the sake of lifting heavy weight without any one particular goal in mind. So I kind of had the same sort of idea that you had alluded to earlier about looking for a new challenge, right? So I wanted to come into something. It's like I sort of saw what these guys did in the CrossFit Games. Which set the worst possible example.
Yeah. Dude, just an aside, I used to do the same thing. I would watch Rich Froning at the CrossFit Games, like probably in that same time period before I would go to the gym and work out.
Guilty as charged.
Yep.
I did it. I mean, when I started, Matt Fraser was the guy who was kind of bullying the field around. But
Yeah.
I mean, same concept, right? You put on YouTube clips of him being a complete freak, and you think, hey, if I train hard enough, you finish the thought on that on your own. If I train hard enough, maybe I'll be as good as him, or maybe I'll be a quarter as good as him. No. Let's not even pretend that you exist in the same universe as this person.
Right.
But having said that, though, like I thought all the stuff was pretty cool, right? Like, I mean, my extent of gymnastics, to the extent that we call it gymnastics, was just pull-ups. So the idea of doing these like wacky things with rings where you like fling yourself over them, and then like you do all sorts of other neat stuff with your body, and then like you Olympic lift and you fuck around with barbells and all sorts of other cool stuff, and you're well conditioned. It's like, that's really cool. It's like, this is a lot of stuff that I can like spend a good long time trying to get better at. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's kind of how I got into this, right? So the years kind of went on in this, and like most people, I mean, two things happen, or maybe one of two things happen, or maybe they both happen. Okay. Things are going great until you get hurt.
Yeah.
For starters,
very common thing in CrossFit.
Very common thing in CrossFit.
It's strength training in general, I'd say.
Yep. I would agree with that, right? Like being in the gym is a very safe activity, but the second you introduce speed to something, it has the ability to go off the rails very, very, very quickly and easily. Right. Something that's not very well respected in general, I find in training, like not just CrossFit. That's not the only place that's guilty of it, but in a lot of sports settings too, like a lot of high speed plyos tend to get like very poorly applied. Yeah. As I was just talking about how many people's knees have been destroyed by depth jumps before.
Yeah.
So but anyways, it doesn't. The problem is that the injury never shatters the illusion, right? The injury is just, okay, that's fine. I kind of like, I fucked around and now I found out, right? Okay, so that's the first thing that happens. So you get past that hurdle. Hopefully you don't get injured again. I got injured again, but hopefully most people don't get injured again.
Yeah. What were the
injuries?
Get injured again.
Yeah. So maybe that's part 1B, is they get injured again.
Yeah.
But eventually when you stop hurting yourself, or maybe you never stop hurting yourself, I don't know. You reach a point where you can't really get better at anything else without having specific focused work on those things, right? And this is, and this is where I don't want to use this term, but I think I have to, is it's the only way to describe it. Where the illusion of CrossFit started kind of falling apart in my head was when I was realizing all of the different movements and the different different skills, the different competencies that you have to do all these things. And you were dealing with like gymnastics and weightlifting and general strength training and conditioning and aerobic conditioning, anaerobic conditioning, and everything that goes sort of commingles those things together into workouts. Was the fact that you can't expect yourself to work on these things when you're vomiting. When you're puking your guts out, you can't expect to get better at those things, right? That's the worst possible time to do this. It's like you walk into the gym on your first day and you see somebody at the gym who, I hate to break this to you, is probably on steroids. Throwing like a 315 snatch over their head, right? And then going for a run, right? And you think like that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I'm going to just go ahead and start doing snatches with the empty bar. And this coach over here is going to watch me do it. And they're going to encourage me to do it.
Yeah.
And guess what? I smack, like I didn't do this. I saw someone else do this, smack the bar straight into their forehead here. Oof. On the way up. I mean, I've seen more than enough people drop the bar on their neck and all sorts of other horrible things.
Yeah. I do the whole like unicorn forehead thing, like on a biannual basis. Biannual, like every 6 months, whatever that is. Every 6 months, I hit myself in the face with the barbell.
So that sentence just confirmed that I will never weightlift again.
Fair.
One of my greatest anxieties is it's not so much for the snatch, it's clocking my chin on a jerk.
Yeah,
because I've done it before.
I have a couple chipped teeth because of that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the coaches at my gym when I was training there at the time knocked himself clean unconscious before on a jerk.
Yeah, there's no way to play that one off.
No. So yeah, getting back to that point, sort of like you start looking for answers to these questions, or at least I start looking for answers to these questions, right? Because it's like I'm sort of at this point where, my lifts on everything are sort of staying at the same level. I'm not really getting any more conditioned. Like I'm not really getting better at any particular thing. I'm trying very hard in these classes. I'm coming to open gym and I'm doing work. And then you sort of see what the professionals are doing, and you realize that's like, oh shit, that's because they're training like 3 times a day and they don't have a job. Yeah. like their job is CrossFit, right? And I mean, their job is also likely taking PEDs, but I'm not going to get into that. However, I will say that for most human beings, it is completely impossible to weightlift with heavy percentages in the morning, do gymnastics and strength work in the afternoon, and condition in the evening. That is just too much fucking work for a human being to handle in most cases.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I mean, having said that, there are obviously people who don't need to go down that road to gain these competencies, and I'm talking to one of them right here. So clearly, my argument is already full of holes and kind of bullshit.
Not true though, because I dedicated my life to this. Exactly what you're saying, and I was training multiple times per day, and I was putting full effort into this, and I'm, for the most part, I'd say I'm genetically predisposed to excel at this type of sport. I think I have the right body type, the right size. I had the right background going into it, and I was good at this when I competed. I competed at a relatively high level, but there was a clear divide between the people like me and the people that were great at this. And there's something to be said about the PED comment that you made, is that when there's someone that, someone I actually competed against at the California Regionals back in like 2015 through 2018, Josh Bridges, I don't want to call him out in any sort of way, but like we're built very similar. We had similar strength levels, but we were just 2 different people. And part of that is probably that he was a Navy SEAL. Like there's levels and layers of mentality that he has probably had to adapt that I'll never have the opportunity, we'll say, to adapt to. But there's a clear divide between people like me that, dedicated their life to this and did this without any sort of drugs. And then there's a tier of people way above that is an unattainable reach. So there's a clear divide between those 2 tiers of athletes in CrossFit at that time, when I'm sure drug testing was, even less prominent than it is now. So it's there's something to be said for that comment, is that right. It's not great now at all. It's all controlled by the organization itself as opposed to a third party. Like, even at the Olympic level, let's not forget that at the highest level of athletic competition, there's people that are taking a fuck ton of drugs and doing really well at these sports and still passing drug tests that are provided by a third party. So,
Yeah.
there's a divide in this, and whenever money is on the line and people's livelihoods are on the line, they're probably going to do the thing that allows them to continue to make that living, even if that's against the loose rule book that's provided by the organization that's also drug testing them if they feel like it.
It's sort of like the thing I always like to say is the mattress salesman trying to tell you need a new mattress, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, you're fucked up because you sleep on that piece of crap at home. You need to buy this $2,000 thing. It's like, I mean, it's not the perfect analog, but it's more like, we control everything. Trust us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's not in our best interest to not pop the guy that's the face of the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there was an entire documentary made about this in the Olympics from the 2014 games, right? Icarus, if I'm remembering the name of that correctly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which has a wild turn at the end where somehow the Russian mob is trying to kill this guy. And he's in hiding, which I didn't expect. Or actually, the Russian government, I think it was.
You gotta love when the documentaries get dark like that out of nowhere. And you're like, I thought we were talking about bees.
Yeah, right. This guy was just cycling with his friends, and now the Russian government's trying to kill him.
No, but I mean the biggest, I think the biggest poster child for PED use in sports, and not to turn this into an entire tangent, which is probably going to end up turning into an entire tangent.
It already has, so just lean into it.
Fuck it. The poster child for this is professional cycling, right? Like the Tour de France. I mean that's one of many events in the professional cycling calendar, so I don't mean to specifically point that out, but that's the one everyone knows about, so I'm just going to say that.
Yeah.
Is there's sort of this concept in my head of the PED line in the field, and we know that blood doping is probably the go-to game or the go-to play in cycling, but there's sort of a PED line when you're looking at the standings, or are you looking at the results of say a particular stage or at the end of the entire tour, where it's okay, so find the big gap between the last good person in X number of standings and the person underneath them. And it might show up I don't know, I'm going to pull a number out of my ass here. I don't know if this is the case, but say 75. Around 75, it's you notice that these people are finishing within minutes, hours of each other. And then suddenly number 76 has a huge gap, right? Mm-hmm. After that person. So that's the PED line, right? I mean, a speculative PED line. We'll never know this for sure, but we can make our own assumptions and sit on our high pedestals of sport mediocrity.
Yep.
Mostly talking about myself here.
And we will make those assumptions, and I'll apologize to the next person that tells me they listen to the podcast.
Right. But I mean, it tells you that okay, I mean, it's probably not a coincidence that these 75 people are doing so significantly better than the rest of these people at the same competition, right? It would be one thing if it was a local niche sort of thing. But I mean, we're talking about an international event that's, I mean, not very well followed here in North America, but very well followed in many other parts of the world. Yeah. Cycling, right, is just and also one that we know for a fact has been plagued with doping issues in the past.
Yeah.
So it's I sort of like to see that, right? I look at that and I sort of see that in a lot of sports, and you sort of see that steroid line, the PED line. I mean, we want to be inclusive of all PEDs, of course.
Right.
There are, we want your HGHs. But yeah, so I did notice that sort of difference tends to appear in most sports in the professional world. I mean, you typically tend to see it football, baseball, soccer to an extent. I mean, soccer is very different in nature in a lot of ways. That sort of sidesteps the PED thing being a necessity to be successful.
Right.
But like football, I think is a good example. You can make the argument that like, playing time is going to make better players, obviously, right? But I mean, the difference between a first string and a second string player is just so vast on so many teams that it's like, how is it possible in a country of 330 million people, 350 million people, how many other people in the US?
You would know better than I would.
Fuck whatever. And our 47 million people up here in Canada that play the fucking weirdest version of football you have ever seen in your life. That is reasonably well followed, if you can believe that, depending on what part of the country you're in. That you could have like a collective pool of like 50 some odd players per team, multiplied by 30 across the league, which gives you I don't know, some number in the thousands, I guess. But I mean, like that's a small number compared to all people who have ever played football, right?
Right.
And that's probably a very small number compared to all people who could play football right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, the question is, why is one person so much better than the next best option available anywhere else?
Yeah.
And there are lots of good answers for that don't involve PEDs, of course, right? It's just a lot of times it does. Right.
Yeah. I think there's always going to be genetic outliers. These people that are really kind of, as I said before, predisposed to do well at these specific tasks. And I think that's going to be, those people are always going to rise to the top of the sport. Like the Usain Bolts, the Michael Phelps, these people that are just built to run and swim and do whatever that sport is. But I think there's, I won't speculate, but there's also a documentary I watched, interesting enough, on Adderall. And two of the athletes that they highlighted in that are Michael Phelps, who takes Adderall in competition, and Simone Biles, two of the best to have ever done the thing that they've done. So even if it's not anabolic steroids, they're taking these things that have some sort of benefit towards, extreme focus in the thing that they're doing. Right. And these people that are genetic outliers, once you throw this other thing into the mix, and maybe it's okay, they have some sort of medical exemption to be able to take this in competition, whatever, that's, some loophole in itself, but they're still taking something to give them a competitive advantage. And to think that at that level, the people that are already at the top are doing this, that the people that are trying to get to the top aren't going to skirt those lines as well.
Yeah. And I think that the other poster child, I don't want to abuse that term here, for that is probably baseball. I mean, like, baseball has a very well documented history of amphetamine usage.
Yeah. And that's a really good example too, especially to parallel with CrossFit, because they're playing, I think it's 164 games.
162, yeah.
Yeah, in a season that doesn't last the whole year. So they're playing multiple games per day, multiple times per week. So I think the parallel that you can run with CrossFit here is recoverability, right? That's a big part of this, is you can have more effective training more often if you can recover better. So there's something that's going to help you recover better. You're probably going to take it if there's, I don't know, a lot of these are 9-figure contracts, if I'm not wrong, in the MLB.
Dude.
Fuck. And no one even watches.
Ouch, that hurts.
I'm sorry, you're a baseball fan.
Yeah,
I know,
that's
Go
okay.
Jays.
It's a. I'm a baseball fan, but I totally get why why a lot of people can't fucking watch it, because at least up until this year, before the pitch clock, God, it was the worst. But it's true though, right? Like, and I mean, being a baseball fan, you can see this divide very clearly in between the major leagues and minor leagues, right? The divide, or the gap that exists between the minor leagues and even to an extent like other professional leagues, right? Like Japan, which has historically been considered the sort of casual term is like quadruple A, right? Like it's somewhere between AAA and Major League Baseball. Some players are Major League Baseball quality, but like it's not really a guaranteed thing. Or like Korea, which is maybe more like a AA level type of thing. But like the point being that there's like the non-MLB and MLB has such an outrageous skill gap to it. And I don't think it's necessarily a skill gap, because if you think about the mechanics of the sport, I mean, pitching is one thing, and that's an entirely different animal. But hitting is a thing that requires your brain. right? And it needs your brain to be real fucking sharp to be good at it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is where I see that being the biggest opportunity to exploit something like Adderall, like amphetamines, like anything that's basically going to jack your shit up. Because you have like a fraction of a second to identify a pitch and where it's going to go before you swing at it, right? And like if you're doing good, you're still fucking up most of the time, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, like a good batting average is what, in the 300s?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's the divide is so plain and obvious that modern statistics that they use to sort of measure performance nowadays and have for the past decade or so focus more on deviation from league average, but also two, the how much better that is than what they would consider like a replacement level player, right? Like somebody who comes from the minor leagues to sort of fill an injury gap, right? Like a guy that it's like, maybe he'll hit 200 and he's a solid glove, I guess, right? Like he won't hurt us. And that's sort of how they evaluate production of players, and they end up like this has real consequences on their contracts, right? Like you can't just be a meathead and club 70 homers a la Mark McGwire anymore. I mean, actually, to be honest, if you club 70 homers in a year, you're probably going to get a big contract anyways. So that's still fucking great. But I mean, you can't do that anymore and approach it with like this meat-headed mentality, because nobody's going to sign you for that kind of money, right? Like the big money contracts are going to the guys that are capable of using their brains when they play, right? It's the only way that they can play nowadays, right? Now I kind of reached the end of this, and I really don't want to leave you hanging on that original question we diverged so fucking far from.
I didn't think it was going to go here, but I'm kind of glad that it did. But we can, reel it back in.
Because at the end of the day, I'm just some fucking guy that's like, everyone's taking PEDs. Let's not kid ourselves. Everyone in professional sports is probably taking a or multiple PEDs.
Yeah.
Because why? Because there's millions of dollars on the line. And if that was my situation and I was genetically gifted, which I'm not because I'm a terrible athlete. But if I was, and I was in this situation where it's just like, hey, if you just use this thing to make your recovery better, you could, basically generate generational wealth for you and your children and your children's children and so on for the next few hundred years. Yeah. That's kind of hard to say no to. And I'm pretty sure I'd say yes to that too.
Right. Especially when the penalties don't really line up with the benefits. Like the risk benefit is, what are they going to test them and then slap them with like a $15,000 fine and sit them for a couple games? But you still have like 300 mil in the bank. You're cool.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Yeah. Like I mean, the drugs are always one step ahead of the testing. And whenever somebody gets caught, it's always some like bullshit drug from like the Soviet Union. Something that no one's heard of for a long time.
Yeah. An interesting case of that is Liu Xiaojun, one of the greatest weightlifters of all time. The past year, he got popped for EPO. The shit that,
blood doping thing.
Yeah, exactly. The shit that Lance Armstrong got popped for, which is such an odd drug for an Olympic weightlifter to get popped for, because it's not an anabolic steroid.
Yeah. Like, I mean, what does an increased red blood cell count do for weightlifting?
Yeah, I don't know. The only thing I would think is kind of like we said, is recoverability, maybe training more often at a higher intensity, but also when you're clean. And I compete in the same weight. I'll use that word very loosely. I've lifted in the same weight category that he lifts in, and us being the same size, he clean and jerks about 60 or more kilos more than I do. So, and I've passed out under cleans before, so I can see there being some benefit to this, is having more oxygen readily available for your brain. But still, I wouldn't imagine that's a drug of choice if you want to get better at Olympic weightlifting. That's pretty far down the list.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably stick with the good old fashioned trend if nothing beats it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, so that kind of makes that case, is that's kind of a bullshit drug to get popped for if you're in a strength sport.
Yeah, it's like It's like getting the being pulled over for your taillight being out and then getting busted with a massive amount of drugs and weapons in your trunk, right? It's just like, how could you be so fucking careless?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if such a metaphor could ever exist for PED usage in Olympic weightlifting,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's exactly it.
So
yeah, I don't know how we got here, but we're here now.
it was a good honestly, it's been something that's been replaying in my head over and over and over and over again after one of my friends said that he didn't think The Rock took steroids.
Oh,
I can't even say that with a straight face.
So yeah, someone whose livelihood definitely depends on being huge and jacked, and there are no repercussions for taking steroids. Yeah, he's probably clean.
You mean to tell me that professional wrestlers and people? Oh God. Anyways, that's a whole other thing. But I to sort of answer the original question of all of this is eventually. So the way I ended up actually getting into the education is like there was that book that I read way back when, right? The very academic one that came out of this. I almost said the Zelensky book. That's not it. That's the Prime Minister of Ukraine. But anyways, the name's escaping me right now. But that sort of like planted the seed on that. So actually, interestingly, in CrossFit, the activity that brought me into the education fold was trying to learn how to do muscle up, which is like a thing that everyone wants to do when they're in CrossFit because it's cool, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I tried about 1 trillion times to fling myself over a bar. And was encouraged by people who absolutely should not have encouraged me to fling myself over a bar.
Yeah.
The whole something about jacking my shoulders into this extra anatomical space that they couldn't go into because I couldn't even put my hands above my head at high speed. Probably not a good idea. But one day I decided I was like, I'm going to get wise with this. I'm going to like learn a little bit about gymnastics. I'm going to learn a little bit about like training in general. I want to get better at this, and it's going to be something I work in my own time. I bought a book called Freestyle, which is I can't remember the guy who. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Which I think it's a neat book, but unfortunately, it sort of fails. Not fails, I guess, is not the right way to put it. It sort of falls short in that it's a problem that I call the rest of the fucking owl problem. Right? Like it was like comes from this meme from the early 2010s where it's like how to draw an owl, start with a circle, then draw the rest of the fucking owl, right? It's just like, yeah, like you're telling people to like go from step 1 to step 2, but the gap between step 1 and step 2 is like enormous, man.
Right.
So I did that. I ended up doing one strict muscle up in my life, which was great.
Yeah.
Hold on, the day I did it,
you did it.
Oh yeah, I did it, and then I never did another one again. The day that I did it, I pulled myself up through the rings and just went straight through the fucking rings and just ate shit so hard. I was just like lying down at the bottom of it, like, okay, all right, shoulders feel all right. Let's try that again. Like,
I tore my labrum loose. Now I can move.
There's the internal rotation I need to get in here. So anyways, by the time I got that was great. That sort of got into the time frame, sort of just before the pandemic. In parallel to this, I used to be as if I hate you guys. I don't listen to any of this stuff anymore. But I was one of the RX faithful for quite a while, and I remember hearing level 1 coming up.
I'm sorry.
Or shallow plugging the level 1 online because I remember it sort of being like this Good Life exclusive only thing for a while. Yeah. And I was like, oh shit, that's so fucking cool. I've been wanting to take this course forever because I keep seeing it on social media. So I took it and I sort of like I don't want this comment to be interpreted as me shitting on CrossFit.
Okay.
But
I am.
But I am. No, but each week that I did of the level 1, if you were to like plot this on a graph of like on one color line is my involvement in CrossFit or CrossFit training I was doing, and then on the other line was weeks of the level 1 course I had taken. Is that they were inversely proportional to each other. And the pandemic certainly had a lot to do with that, as I mean, doing that kind of shit in a 560 square foot condo was not advised. However,
hated you.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, it sort of got, you know, the more that I learned about this, the more that I realized that I wasn't progressing because I refused to train not refused to train the shit I was bad at. I didn't understand how to effectively use my body is probably the best way to put it. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was just as easy enough. It's like, I've been a human being for I guess at the time, some 30 something years. It can't be that fucking hard, right? Like, it's just do human things. But it turns out it's just kind of that fucking hard. So I mean, I did that. I started increasingly integrating more and more of these things that I was getting out of this, and that sort of started the spark for me. Actually, parallel to this, I left out one important part. When I was sort of reaching the end of my CrossFit tenure, I also did, I got a CSCS that I've never actually used to train anyone with. But the idea of it, like, it just, in the way that my brain works, is that like education is like almost invalid unless it has a credential that's associated with it. It's like, because I need that to prove to myself that I learned it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you reached the standard that they wanted you to reach. Even if it is, you know,
I did
maybe not very applicable, but yeah, I get it.
Outrageously inapplicable.
Yeah.
So
I've read that entire book, Essentials to Strength and Conditioning, the CSCS book, and I refused to take the test because on all the practice tests, there was this section of like muscle physiology that was so like minuscule details, like what is the Z band or H zone or whatever the fuck. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this.
I still remember studying for the exam and poring over the biochemical chart of being like, this hormone does that. And then thinking to myself, okay, that's cool, but when the fuck am I ever going to be tested on this? Yeah. Like, in a point where I can't use the internet as a reference, right? Like, exactly. Why do I need to internalize that information as a coach? Like, I'm not reading blood panels. Like, you shouldn't be teaching people in the CSCS how to read blood panels. That's not their scope.
It's surprising how many people in this space read blood panels and then give recommendations based off of them, though. A little bit a lot of shade there, but I digress.
Dude. So yeah, like, but anyways, I came with a level 1, and this is some sort of like shameless self-promotion on our end, is it actually made those concepts, not the biomechanical or by the biochemical one, sorry, but the biomechanical concepts become more applicable. So I did those. That sort of like started the spark of this. And it's like, now I just want to learn absolutely everything that there is to know about this, because as I started integrating these things into my training, I realized all of the classical problems that I was having when I was training started to go away, right? Like, my plateaus started disappearing everywhere, right? Like, and I mean, this is a big thing. Shout out Bax, because this is one thing that he leans on heavily, and I very much agree. The same exercises forever. Yeah. Now I do the same exercises forever. And I mean, that's not a literal term. I do have to change things inevitably in response to other events, but I can typically keep something in my programming for years. I'm not talking about like, I'm doing it for a cycle or something like that. It's like, no. If you want to be good and build muscle on this thing, you're going to have to do it for like a really fucking long time. Yeah. And it's going to be grueling and really boring, but it's the only way it gets done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's such a good point. There's so many good points in that, even with the drug tangent, but it's, I think to distill that down to a very kind of very concise pathway is that when you're unexposed to the stuff, you can just try hard and get results to a point.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to do the thing, you're going to do it hard, and you're going to get better at it. But if you don't have any sort of understanding of where to go after that, or the processes that are going to get you better, then you're going to run into those roadblocks. You're going to have plateaus, you're going to have injuries. And the way past that, or the way through that, is education. You actually have to deepen your awareness of where you're trying to go and how to get there so that you can build an effective pathway to get there. And that's not just trying hard. That's not, I know a big thing in CrossFit is constantly varied functional movements performed at a high intensity. And this is, yeah,
The high
this is
intensity part. Just
yeah, a little bit of an aside, but I think the most effective training for CrossFit, if in the competition realm, if you want to be a competitive CrossFitter, it's not doing CrossFit. It's testing CrossFit, but you need to do these things in a very skill focused way. Exactly how you were explaining is that you need to have very mundane training sessions where you have maybe a skill focused Olympic weightlifting session early on when you're fresh. Then later on in the day, you have maybe a lower skill or metcon, like energy system pathway training session, and then like a low level cardio session later in the day. And you need to do
yeah,
that on repeat forever, where you're training skills that don't look necessarily like a CrossFit test, we'll say, or a CrossFit workout. And then you're doing things that maybe look a little more similar, but are a little bit focused on progression, right? A meaningful, intentional progression. And then you're doing something to maintain some sort of base level aerobic capacity at the same time. And that is the most effective way to train for something that's so random like that. But there's so many skills that you need to learn, that you need to get better at. It's just so time consuming if you want to get better at it. So I think that's the thing that a lot of people that do CrossFit as an exercise regimen don't understand, is that just by doing CrossFit, yes, you're going to feel like you worked hard, but you're not necessarily going to have long-term benefit from that. You're going to get to a place and then you're going to stop progressing because the thing that you're doing is only preparing you for the thing that you're doing, not to get better at the thing that you're doing. And that's my gripe with it.
yeah, and honestly, I couldn't agree more with it. Right, like the one sort of way I would like package up my biggest gripe with the way that this is sort of conveyed to most people in most gyms, is like, even if I don't consider the fact that that so many of these things are practiced in metcons and places, which is a place that absolutely should be practiced. But like, just imagine yourself, like, if you can't move from point A to point B properly, what on earth makes you think that adding speed is going to help?
Yeah.
Right? Like it, and I mean, I'm specifically pointing out weightlifting here because that's the sort of the easy example of this. Is like, if you can't, if you can't pull and do your first and second pulls, extend your hips fully and pull yourself under the bar slowly, then you absolutely can't even begin to start thinking about doing it quickly. And I don't understand, like the thought that's like, maybe if I just do it real fast and aggressively, it's going to work.
I'm going to try
right?
harder. Yeah.
Right. And then on top of that, we're going to say, okay, that's enough practice in your on the minute thing where you're already kind of tired. Now we're going to beat the shit out of your lungs.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have you practice it when you're puking your fucking guts out.
Yeah. And that's such a good point. And I'll take this more to my area of expertise, Olympic weightlifting, is that I like to set very specific failure criteria for people, right? Is that if this is skill work and we're practicing, then we need to practice in a way that's going to improve our understanding or buffer our capacity to do the movement in a more effective way over time. If we're not doing that, bad practice is getting us better at doing the movement poorly, as opposed to getting us better at the movement on the whole. So unless we have very clear failure criteria around that, then we're going to have more bad practice and we're just going to get better at doing the movement ineffectively. So that's the big part that I think is missing with this, is that if we can set clear failure criteria, and an analogy that I'll make is that if we want to get better at golf and we go to the batting cage and swing a baseball bat, is, in some ways it's similar to the way you would swing a golf club. But if I'm just hitting fastballs at the batting cage, it's not going to make me any better technically at my golf swing, even though, there's going to be a little bit of carryover there. And that's what a lot of people are doing when they're snatching in a Metcon, is they're in the batting cages when they need to be working with their golf coach.
Yeah. I that's a perfect analogy for me because it was so personal. I could guess how I learned how to play golf.
Right.
In all honesty, this is sort of a thing that I have a bit of a gripe a lot of weightlifting programming too, and given this sort of intersection with the CrossFit world, is sort of the way that skill work is kind of mal applied as some kind of band-aid to fix. It's like, well, you can't hold your posture in your first pull, so we're going to have you do skill work. It's like, here's the problem with that. I think that's putting the cart after the horse, right? Like that's the problem with that's going back to the, if you can't do it slowly, what that on earth makes you think you can do it quickly? Is like that actually needed to be taught before they started doing the full movement. It can't, in fact, I might even go as far to say, I hate being this way, is that it can't be taught this way now. It just can't, because the technical demands of the full clean and jerk and the full snatch are so different from like your pull variations and your hang variations and stuff like that, because they're just like, they eliminate and they isolate. And when you're actually performing a clean and jerk and a snatch, it's so complicated and it's so all inclusive that work is going to be, what's Jallo's term? It's a gnat on an elephant's ass, right? Like, it's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to hold my posture because I did a bunch of clean deadlifts. It's like, the fuck you aren't, because now your head is thinking that you're going to have to pull this thing with all your life at the top of it and then pull yourself underneath it. What the fuck? Like, you took this exercise, you overloaded it, you made it super simple. You did that, and then you went straight back to doing the hard thing, and you thought it was going to help.
Yeah.
Right.
I fucking love it. Yeah, and that's a beautiful way to look at it. And I'm going to plug the Olympic weightlifting course here, because that's exactly how I teach the snatch and the clean and jerk. Is you need to work at understanding isolated portions of the lift before you can put it all together and understand the lift as a whole. Is that you need to define hip extension. Hip extension. I'm going to say that in air quotes because it gets bastardized as hip extension all the time, when really it's hip, the coordination of hip and knee extension, right? The connotation of just hip extension puts you in a bunch of positions that are not representative of what's going on. So you need to understand the coordination of both hip and knee extension. And you need to understand the flow of movement from lower body to upper body. Is how are we continuing the tension with the barbell as our feet leave the ground? And there's a bunch of these things that are they're happening very fast in the full lift that we can't train in the full lift because it's happening too fast to understand. Is that we need to train it in isolation so we can build an understanding of how we're moving at each of these specific phases. And we need to do that slowly and very repetitively before we add speed or load and put it all together.
Yeah, precisely, right? Like, I know one of the biggest sins that you'll find in Olympic weightlifting from well-intentioned people in the CrossFit world is being incapable of extending their hips.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can do your high hang variations all day long. You can do your pulls, but none of those things are going to help you extend your hip when you actually have to do the full movement. Right.
Yes.
It's and like, also, while we're at it, none of those things, working with an empty bar is also not going to help you do it, because it's Killian's phrase, right? Technique doesn't matter until it's tested, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, these interventions of using like high hangs and using like these pulls is like, in my head, I'm sitting as a guy who doesn't really know fucking anything about Olympic weightlifting. But in my head,
you know more than you think you know. you know more than you're willing to admit, because you're humble and you know everything. That's actually a better explanation.
I appreciate that. But I mean, I was always a shitty weightlifter and probably would be a shitty coach. But I would use those interventions more through the lens of load management than I would be for like, oh, we got to fix your lack of hip extension in the clean. So for 4 weeks, you're going to do this, and then you're going to go back to cleaning from the floor again, because that's going to fucking work. Right. And if it does, I'm so happy. I'm so happy for you that if it does. But speaking from experience, it definitely never helped for me.
Right. And your experience comes from education, because this is a very kind of, what's the way to say it? It's a very systems way of thinking, or systematic way of thinking, is that if this, then that, right? What is that? That's a term in what you do, the coding, right? An if-then statement.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, that's a thing.
That's the thing. Okay, so
it's like, sort of think as like algorithmic thinking.
Right. That's the word I was looking for. Right. Is that coaches think in this way: if no hip extension, then high hang. Right. It's, if this is the problem, then this is the answer, as opposed to really understanding the nuance behind it and having some sort of education behind it, so that you can interpret on a deeper level of, actually, the reason that they can't extend their hip is because they're off balance. And they're off balance because they don't understand how to use their core. And they can't use their core because their understanding of core bracing is really just lumbar extension. So once you can start to pull it apart and actually look at what's going on and solve the problem that you're actually dealing with the human in front of you, then it becomes less algorithmic. I don't know. I said that really wrong.
I'm embarrassed. I'm too worried to say it again.
Yeah, no, it's whatever Matt said before. It becomes less if then, and you can actually deal with the problem at hand. And I think that's the thing with coaching a lot of times, is that there's a very low barrier of entry. Is that people can, especially with CrossFit, people can take this CrossFit certification and say, I'm a coach now. And they don't really understand how to bridge the gap from circle to owl, right? It's that huge leap. So once you can start to break it down, understand on a more biomechanical level, and you can understand how the body works, then you could take how the body works and apply that to, okay, how does the body work? But how does the body work in this position of the snatch? And these are the disconnects between those two things. So let's fix that disconnect and see how it correlates back to the thing that you sucked at before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an old expression for this that I'm probably just about to butcher.
We're in that phase of the podcast now. thanks to me.
But it's something to the tune of like to ship without a map, all ports are dangerous, or something like that. Like basically, if you don't know where you're going, all directions are the wrong direction.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
yeah. So it's like, I mean, having an appreciation for even the simplest thing, with how biomechanics work, even with just like the simplest hinge joint that you can think of, is already more than what 99% of people who walk into gyms know about their bodies, which is actually kind of scary if you think about it.
Yeah.
But kind of an important aspect of this, right, is it's like you can't begin to understand and appreciate a complicated thing if you can't understand and appreciate the simple thing first, right? Like you can't jump from the circle to the owl without actually learning how to draw in between those two steps, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of times what happens is that, I hate to keep bringing it back to CrossFit like this, but that's the thing, is that you walk into a gym and there's a workout on the board and it's the owl, right? And people just keep trying to draw owls for that entire session, and they're not getting any better at drawing. They're not learning anything about, I don't know anything about drawing, but proportions and shading and perspective and negative space. I know that's one. I had an art class in college just because I needed credit, but I passed it. But they're not they're not learning the things that make them better at drawing an owl. They're just trying to owl.
Yeah. And also, I have to sit here and appreciate. I actually took a drawing class in university because it was part of my required curriculum for my underutilized degree of video game development, which is a whole other ball of wax. And you actually did list pretty much the core concepts of drawing, and somebody is going to DM us after this episode goes out, who's actually an artist, and is going to be like, you guys are a couple of fucking idiots.
Yeah, no, we're a couple of idiots, and I'll apologize to you when you DM me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep going back on a CrossFit to beat the dead horse on it, but it's such an easy target.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that I'll bring it back with this, is that I think there's a utility to it, and I think it can be done in a very effective way, but I don't think on the whole that it is. I think there's a lot of disconnect, and I think it can be something that's very useful because of the power behind the brand and the power behind the name that can do a lot of benefit. And I think it has done a lot of benefit for a lot of people, but I think there's also a bit of a disservice. I have a client who does CrossFit, and handstand push-ups are a thing. They're people trying to owl the owl. He came into me. He texted me this morning, actually. He fractured his C1 doing a handstand push-up.
What?
In a CrossFit gym, in a CrossFit workout. Yeah. How
Dude.
fucked is that? Is that if you're allowing that to happen, then you're doing a greater service than you are a service.
Dude, the kipping handstand push-up needs to die.
Yeah.
The amount of people that I used to see in the gym that I trained at that would just like slam their heads into the floor, like they'd lock out and then just go like every rep over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, the subconcussive blows about 120 times in a session. Sure, that's doing good things for your brain, but like fracturing a vertebrae, man, that is rough.
Right. So it's it's something that there needs to be some sort of standard set in the culture, in the environment, in that gym, in that atmosphere of improvement, and some sort of importance on proper technique and proper progression. And that's what's going to allow it to be effective. Is that a lot of times the way this is implemented is that in a specific gym, they rule what CrossFit is. They define what that is for their community. So you can either do a really effective job at that, and you can do a really beneficial job of laying out good progressions and setting a good understanding and communicating well what the intentions are, or you can just kind of put a workout out there and have people owl the owl. And there's a big difference between those two concepts. So I think that the better you understand what you're trying to deliver to the population you're delivering it to, you can be more effective at doing that in a safe and beneficial way. And the bigger that disconnect is, then there's a good potential for harm there, just like any exercise.
Absolutely. How many times have I said that? Absolutely. Wow, that's a thought.
It's for some reason it's like we have the same bias towards this. Interesting. Weird.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, my closing thoughts on the matter, my closing argument. I don't have an axe to grind with it itself. I think it's a net positive in this world. Anything that gets people moving is a good thing. Well, I'm going to say that insofar as the movement itself. The CrossFit health stuff was a big whole pile of nope that I think they absolutely should not have fucking ventured into. And the dietary advice that they give is generally pretty dog shit. But I will say that, I mean, the world has a general shortage of people moving. It's good to get people moving again. Let's just remember why they're here, right? Like they're here to sweat, to maybe some people want to lose weight. Maybe some people just want to be active, but they're just there because they want to do something different when they're training, right? They just want to do something different and fun and neat. And let's not bastardize that sort of youthful ambition. I don't know if that's the best term, but that sort of pure ambition by layering all sorts of skill on top of it. That's just going to end up being noise, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think something that we've all learned in this space is working with clients in the real world is that what your client wants to do, they're probably going to do. So whatever that is, as long as you can set up guide rails to guide them in the right direction and kind of direct them away from dangerous situations or injury, then that's the best you can hope for. And I think that fits really well with this population, is that they're going to do what they want to do. And I'm not going to preach and say that people shouldn't enjoy what they're doing. You have to make this fun. You have to make it engaging. People do it for the community, so they're going to continue to do it. But if you can have a better understanding of why they're doing it and communicate that to them, then you can be just more effective in the implementation of it.
Yeah. I think that just goes down to being a good trainer in general too, right? Like regardless of sort of your selected medium, so to speak, is usually having a good understanding of why this person is here in the first place, right? What they want, what they like, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing your client. I think that I say that stuff out loud and it sounds super obvious, but I do feel that it gets missed amongst the noise.
Yeah. I think that's great. All right. Before we go down another rabbit hole, maybe we'll wrap it here. I always enjoy these conversations with you, Matt. I think it's really valuable to get your perspective. If people want to reach out to you, talk to you more, where can they find you?
Totally. You can find me either on, take this moment to plug, Prescript Collective. That's prescript.com/collective. I'm on there pretty much all the time because all I do is work. However,
that's how this goes.
However, if workaholic mediums aren't your thing, I'm on Instagram. You can find me at Penney, EMPENNERY. I don't have a ton of interesting stuff to talk about most of the times, but I am going to the Met in a couple weeks, and y'all better buckle the fuck up for that trip.
I've
That's
gotten
gonna be a
better
lot of fun.
history lessons from your Instagram stories when you go to museums than I have in any education in the past. So I'm excited for this. I'll be following along. And there's a lot of good goose content.
Oh yes, of course. Let's never forget the geese.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out, Matt. I appreciate you.
Always a pleasure, man.